You're listening to The Head Trash Show with me, Alexia Leachman, author of Clear Your Head Trash. Head Trash is the home to the head trash clearance method, which you can use to get rid of the fears, stresses and anxieties in your life. Every week I'll be sharing insights, stories and interviews to inspire you to clear your head trash so that you can find calmness, confidence and clarity in your life and work. To find out more about clearing head trash and creating a headspace, head over to clearyourheadtrash.com. And now for today's show. Hello and welcome back to the Head Trash Show. My name is Alexia Leachman. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now in today's podcast, I want to talk about anxiety and whether or not it comes from your time in the womb, your in utero experience. So this might seem like an odd link to make, right? But actually your time in the womb, the time that you spend being carried by your mother for those 9 months is really crucial part of the building blocks that make up you. I mean, at the end of the day, she's building a new human being. And during that time, you are connected to her as one. And so what she feels, you feel. What she thinks, you hear and connect to. So when you think about it in that way, it's kind of pretty obvious that whatever she's going through is going to have an impact on your emotional system, on your emotional blueprint, like the patterns that you are set up with as you are prepared to live in the world that she is living in. Because at the end of the day, in order to survive as a living being, you need to be well prepared to live in the world that she is in. So whatever she is going through, you will be experiencing on some level and preparing yourself to be able to survive in that environment. Now, there's lots of evidence around whether babies are sentient beings and at what time in the womb they begin to hear and feel and sense. So this is backed by lots of evidence. And if you're curious about this, then go and seek out the work of Dr. Thomas Verney, who I've interviewed recently on the podcast, but also Dr. David Chamberlain. But I don't want to get into all that now. What I really want to get into is whether or not what you're wrestling with today has got a link or a root in your time in the womb, in your utero experience. And I want to share a personal journey on how I realised that some of the biggest head trash stuff that I'm wrestling with as an adult came from my time in the womb. Now the thing about, I'm going to talk about trauma, and yes, I'm on a bit of a trauma thing right now because trauma is the root of a lot of our anxiety, of our fears, of our phobias, of the mental health stuff that we're wrestling with and how that shows up in our lives, whether we end up being a bully or an addict or whatever is going on for us, the chances are it's rooted in trauma. And so looking toward trauma, like deciding to kind of deal with your trauma, overcome it, heal it, this is really going to help you to kind of let go of this stuff because it's trauma that kind of keeps all that stuff locked in, right? So this is why I've been hunting down my traumas and really kind of relentlessly looking under every rock in every dark corner because I'm really kind of obsessed with clearing my head trash, right? And I hope to inspire you to do the same because it's not all depressing and hard work. It's actually really invigorating because the more you clear, the better you feel. And so even though I've got to sit and cry my ass off for 45 minutes and create a mountain of snotty tissues and then need to go to bed, I much prefer to go through that 45 minutes of crying to then know that I've kicked this trauma to the curb and it's not affecting me anymore. Anyway, so I want to get back to this in utero experience because as I've said, I've been hunting down my traumas and my wrestling with my head trash and like really just trying to sort it out. So when I'm wrestling with something and I'm doing all my head trash clearance and it's not really shifting in the way that I'd expect, then I just carry on digging and digging until I can kind of figure it out. So with this particular thing I was wrestling with, I was like, right, okay, this really isn't shifting. I've done loads of clearances and it's not eradicating itself in the way that I expect. So just sort of talk about that for a bit. So when I clear fears and anxieties and conflicts, normally, if there's no trauma rooting it in, it just gets cleared out of the way super quick. So let's say a spider phobia, that kind of thing. Then you can clear a spider phobia if you're scared of spiders, as I had a fear of spiders. And I was able to just knock that one out of the park in like 10 minutes. And that was it. It was done. You know, I'm totally fine with spiders. Whereas if there's a trauma there, then you kind of maybe you can do 80% of the work. So you feel much more comfortable around spiders, but there's still like this lurking thing that you like, oh, well, I'm still not super happy with them. And so that's a clue that there potentially could be a trauma involved in keeping this in. And like, it's almost like the roots are still there. You can cut the branches, you can trim it all up, you can, like when you're doing your gardening, you can do all it, you can't see anything in the soil, but the bloody roots are still there. So you've got to go for the roots, right? Because as long as the roots are there, some of that stuff can sprout back. Okay, so this was what I was wrestling with, where I was clearing stuff and it just wasn't shifting in the way that I was used to seeing. So I was like, right, okay, there's got to be a trauma here. But the thing is, I couldn't think of anything. Like, I was like, well, there might be, but I can't remember if there's anything related to this stuff, right? I don't know. So I decided that I would instead place my intention on clearing any trauma that might be there that was related to this head trash I was wrestling with. And so I decided to proceed on that basis. And so that's what I did. And then what followed was like a pretty brutal hour of clearance work. Yes, there was snot. Yes, there were tears. And then there was more tears. And it just kind of kept coming. And by the end of that hour, I was pretty spent, I have to say. But I was feeling good, right? I was feeling good, like you do after a really good gym workout. You kind of feel completely knackered, completely out of it. But you're like, yes, I've just done loads of exercise. And yes, I'm going to ache tomorrow, but oh my God, I feel good for it. That's how I felt, okay? And as I sort of, because I'm quite curious about all this stuff. So I carried on digging afterwards. And as it happened, it proved to be one of the most significant clearances I'd done to date for myself. Because this traumatic event that I had uncovered and cleared proved to be the key to lots and lots of patterns that were running in me. These were like emotional patterns that were sabotaging me and holding me back in a massive way. And interestingly, it was also one of the key events that was at the root of my eczema, which is something that I've been really struggling with my whole life and that had come back with a vengeance around this time as well. So once I'd done all this clearance work and I, built my mountain of tissues, I was like, okay, well, what the hell was this event? Like, what was it that made me cry for an hour and create so much snot? I was kind of curious because I'm a curious person. So I decided to carry on with my digging and my curiousness and basically see what I could find. Now, we always hear that childhood trauma is usually the culprit. So I was like, well, I'll start there. So I tuned into myself and I used the ways that I work to try to get answers, which I'm not going to go into now. So I'm just going to tell you that I'm just, tuning in. So I asked the question, was I under 5? Yes, I was under 5. Okay. Was I under 4? I was under 4. And then I got a hunch. Was I in utero? Yes. Oh my God. And then it just came to me. Like all of a sudden, I just knew exactly what it was, what this event was. And it was all about my mother. Now, when my mother was pregnant with me, she was really worried about losing her job if they found out that she was pregnant. This was the 70s. So, women's equality was not where it is today. Not that today it's in a very good place, but it was nowhere near that in the 70s. And so, yeah, she may have lost her job if they found out that she was pregnant. She was also the main breadwinner because my father was at university doing a PhD. So she tried to keep me a secret from her employers in case they found out and fired her. That would be mega stressful in anybody's book, right? I mean, pregnancy can be stressful enough anyway without worrying about possibly losing the family income and being fired. So, when I think about the kind of thoughts that she was probably having, she was probably thinking things like, I've got to hide this. I must keep this a secret. I want my bump to be small. I've got to keep small. I've got to be small. My baby can't be visible. If I get found out, I'll lose my job. So, there's probably many, many more thoughts that were accompanying her journey of pregnancy. But there's some obvious ones that I can think of. And then when I was writing this down before I prepared to record this, I was like, oh my God, like all of this stuff, this is all of my head trash. Because a lot of the stuff that I've been wrestling with around this time that I did this clearance was stuff that I had been wrestling with for ages. And there's around visibility. Like, I'm not shy to getting to talk on stage. I've spoken in front of hundreds. I've performed on stage as a dancer in front of thousands. So being on stage, being visible is not a problem for me. I've also had a podcast for many, many years. My podcast has been downloaded over 1.5 million times. I've interviewed lots of incredible guests. So again, speaking out, having large audiences is not something that worries me. But I've noticed that I was flip-flopping with this. You know, sometimes I could be super visible and super out there, and other times I'm like, no, I don't want to. I want to hide. I don't want people to know, blah, blah, blah. And it just doesn't make any sense at all. And I do this flip-flopping, right? And so, yeah, so when I looked at this, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm basically wrestling with my mum's stuff and flip-flopping with me and mine, who I am. So me, Lex, is okay with being visible and out there. But my mum wasn't being okay with being visible and being seen because of all these reasons I've just stated. And so this is probably why I wasn't able to really go all in with what I was doing, because I kept getting pulled back because of the trauma into hiding and playing small. But they were her traumas, not mine. But they were imprinted because I was sharing body and system and everything with her during all of this time. So, you know, looking at it like that, it's really obvious what the hell was going on. But until I got the hunch to go and sort of hunt this one down, I was blind to it, absolutely blind to it. And this is why being curious about your head trash, hunting down the traumas is so essential. You know, traumas have got a bit of a bad reputation. You know, they can be scary and people talk about, oh, well, you've got to tread carefully with trauma. It's very complex and blah, blah, blah. Yes, but actually it's simple. The trauma is a memory. It's an emotional energy that's trapped that you're still carrying because of an event, because of the way that you perceived an event happening to you. But you can let that emotional energy go, right? You can let it go. And when you let it go, you might have an hour of crying, but at the end of it, you'll feel so much better for it. And so I really want to encourage you to kind of be curious around why you're wrestling with some of the head trash that you're wrestling with today, because you might get some really amazing aha moments. And by doing that, you get to let this stuff go for good and really make quantum leaps in your own personal development. But I just want to talk a little bit about why your time in the womb matters, because I don't think a lot of people really realise how much it does. Now, I've done a lot of work around birth and pregnancy as part of my Fearless Birthing book, the podcast, Fear-Free Childbirth. So if you want to kind of listen and look into all of that, then I would encourage you to take a look at the book Fearless Birthing, where I share the fear clearance method and everything in the context of pregnancy and birth and tocophobia, but also my podcast, Fear-Free Childbirth podcast. But there's a lot of evidence, like I said earlier, about why your time in the womb matters and how it can create these emotional imprints for you. There's an incredible woman called Anna Verwell. She talks a lot about this, about how the arrival of the way that you arrive into the world, whether it's C-section, whether it's with a ventouse, whether it's a natural birth, down the birth canal, all of that can really play out into how you behave in your life today. So, for example, something I remember that she said to me, that people that had to be pulled out with the ventouse, they tend to need, and also C-sections, people who are born like that need help getting out of sticky situations. They don't have that capacity within them to push through because they need to be pulled out, which is exactly what's going on with how they arrive in the world. That's their very first lesson that they learn, is that I don't need to do this. Someone is going to pull me out. Whereas a baby resting down the birth canal knows they've got to push on through and make it happen. Otherwise, they're going to get stuck. So, you know, it's really interesting when you kind of look into this, how much your time in the womb impacts you today, but also the way that you arrive in the world. So if you're curious about all this, then maybe head over to my Fear-Free Childbirth podcast and start with the episode with Dr. Thomas Verney. That's a really good place to start. So I hope that this episode has been useful for you, and I would encourage you to think about maybe some of the patterns that you're wrestling with today and have a conversation with your mother to find out what the pregnancy was like. When she was carrying you, what was she struggling with? What was she stressed about? What were the things that were taking up her headspace? Because it could be that some of those things are things that you're wrestling with. They just don't make any sense to you. And that there's you that's trying to do one thing, but because your mother was experiencing something very different, you're being pulled in that direction too. And you're flip-flopping. You can't go all in with something because you've got this tension, this pull, this invisible force that's pulling you back, holding you back in some way. Of course, there could be many other reasons why you've got this invisible force happening, but a really good place to start, I think, is looking at the time that you spent in the womb. Okay, so I hope that was a useful episode for you. Do let me know what your thoughts are, if any aha moments came to you as a result of listening to this, or maybe asking your mother about the pregnancy where she was carrying you, because I'm super nosy, as I'm sure you can appreciate and you've guessed by now, because I want to know. I love hearing stories about this stuff. So until next time, bye for now. Thanks for tuning in. You've just been listening to me, Alexia Leachman, here on The Head Trash Show. If you enjoyed the show or the book, Clear Your Head Trash, I'd really appreciate you leaving a review on iTunes or Amazon. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes for more insights, interviews and inspiration for clearing your head trash and reclaiming your headspace. Until next time, bye for now.